Testing live stream. Testing live stream.
Hey, Katie.
Hello. Oh, hi, Kenji. I couldn't see who was on.
Just me showing up early.
Well, thank you. We are live streaming. I started it a little early to make sure it actually worked.
Yep, looks like it's working. I got that little message saying recording. So all's good.
Well, we're live streaming to YouTube as well.
Sweet.
So I don't know that we have very many people watching yet, but
is anybody watching? I'm curious.
Let me see if I can. Oh yeah, there's 4 people watching.
Oh, hello, YouTube land. Well, this will be a good one. I'm looking forward to it. So
yes, I'm
awesome.
Moving things forward.
Yay.
And we have a good group of people that are joining us too. So it should be a good discussion.
Yeah, more people is actually a good thing, which I think is good. And I think the new language looks pretty good in terms of it's good compromise, and I think it's a step in the right direction. So,
oh, good.
Yay! Yeah, I like the piece about it, the sort of keeping the camp areas off limits. That just totally makes sense.
Yeah, I think that addresses the primary privacy concern.
Yeah, and nobody wants to hear a drone buzzing around unless like 6 o'clock in the morning, hanging out in their yurt or something like that, right? I don't want it.
Yes.
So, but if it's permitted and everybody knows, then it's not as bad. So that's cool.
Good. Well,
where is everybody? It's supposed to start in 45 seconds.
I don't know. We seem to be. Hi, Erica.
Oh, there's some more folks.
I think it takes a little bit to get on.
Yeah, the invite was a little weird. I had to jump through a couple steps to get in. So.
Well, that's what I didn't make people register this time, and I thought if I just sent you the Zoom link, it would work. But if I get it, I'm watching my email too to see if there's anybody that is having issues.
Yep. Let's see. There's one attendee, and then
I just moved Kim here. Hi, Kim. We're just waiting for a few more folks. I'm going to stop the screen share. We're just waiting for a few more folks to join us.
Hey, Erica, how things over at Aqua?
Hey, things are good. It's been really busy. We've got a lot going on, but it's all good things.
I'm testing my audio. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear, Kim. I bet it's going to be a banner year on the coast.
Yeah. And it's like a beautiful winter week.
I'm testing my audio. Can you hear it okay?
Yep, we can hear you, Kim.
So Kenji, are you officially no longer a tourism commissioner?
Yeah,
wow.
Sadly enough, so.
Sorry to hear that.
I know, but I ran through my term, and it was a very good run. I'm gonna miss everybody, but it's I get together with Scott Youngblood pretty often, and I always head out to Five Pine a lot as well.
Oh,
so
nice.
And I keep in touch with a lot of folks, cool. But it's sad not to be able to see the rest of the staff more or less. But I think what I'll do is I'll make an effort to just keep in touch. And especially I love Katie and Kevin and the entire crew. So you'll see me show up some commission meetings, and I'll still ask questions. You know that's going to happen.
Good. It's good to have question askers always.
Oh yeah. All right.
I fixed it so anybody who would like to share their video, it's now working. There was a setting I hadn't done yet. And anybody who just joined us, we're streaming live to YouTube, and that is currently working.
Heather, yay. I owe you an email, by the way.
Yes. Hi, Kenji.
Yeah. Good to see you. Oh, you're at home. You're not at the ODA. Wait.
No.
Yeah, that is home for you. Yay. Hope everything is good over there.
It is. I'm currently in the office 2 days a week.
Oh, good. So you get to split time. That's
Yeah.
That saves the commute for you.
Good. Well, it looks like we have critical mass, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you all for joining us for the second Rule Advisory Committee on the takeoff and landing of drones, or UAS. We're going to start with introductions so that we have some new folks on the committee and some of you who were at the first meeting, but we'll get started. We are live streaming to YouTube, so there are folks watching us. And if you want to introduce yourself and kind of your experience with drones or management of drones, that would be great. So my name is Katie Gauthier. I am the Government Relations and Policy Manager, and I'm managing this rulemaking process for OPRD. And I'm just going to go through the list as I see them on the panelist and ask you to introduce yourself. So Ed, you're first on my list.
All right, make sure that you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a pretty complicated hookup here with Bluetooth connections to hearing aids. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. My name is Ed Rutledge. I live in Salem and I spend about half time on the coast. We have a coast house at Tierra del Mar, which is just down the way from Cape Coanda and also sandwiched in between the Sitka Sedge State Natural Area. And I live about 300 yards off the beach and spend a lot of time on the beach. So I'm pretty aware of the beach issues. I've been flying drones now for about 6 years and I'm into my first renewal. So about 3 years, I've had a Part 107 certification. And but I don't do this commercially. I have done some work for nonprofit organizations, which by the way, drove my getting the Part 107 certification, because even nonprofit work is considered in furtherance of a business activity. So that was required. I do post videos on YouTube from time to time. And currently I have a drone fleet consisting of 2 drones, one Skydio 2, and I just picked up a Skydio 2 Plus. But I've also had Mavic DJI drones and also an Autel drones, but those are no longer in my fleet. So that's me.
Great. Thanks. Erica?
Yeah, hi, I'm Erica Sears. I'm the Deputy Director of the Oregon Coast Visitors Association. We're the regional destination management organization for the entire Oregon coast. There are 7 RDMOs in our state. Our state is broken up in these different tourism regions. I'm quite partial to the Oregon coast, obviously. And so we do actually quite a bit of different things, from workforce to supporting seafood and fishers. But today, of course, we're talking about drones. I work very regularly with our land management agencies like state parks, BLM, ODFW, Forest Service, ODOT, to understand the impacts to our natural resources and public safeties from visitors. So of course we have drones, understanding the psychology psychology of why people are doing sometimes the wrong thing, how we can message to make them do it better, how we can support visitors in doing the right thing. Additionally, we are also doing responsible marketing for the Oregon Coast, which is the commercial side of drone usage, of commercials talking about the Oregon Coast Trail, the economic impact of these different assets that we have. Ed, my neighbor, I'm also from Tierra del Mar and streaming from Tierra del Mar today. So thanks for letting me join.
Great, thanks, Erica. How about Brady?
Hi, good morning. I'm Brady Callahan, and I'm the geospatial team lead at Oregon State Parks. I've been at the agency for about 18 years now. I'm also the department's GIS program coordinator, and I'm a Part 107 pilot.
Great, thanks, Brady. Heather?
Hi, good morning. I'm Heather Peck with the Oregon Department of Aviation, Policy and Programs Manager. And in my role, I also coordinate all UAS with our agency, and that includes policy, work with test sites, collecting data from other state agencies that use drones, and drone work on policy and including coordination with all local jurisdictions and governments for land use.
Great, thank you. Joe?
Hey everybody, my name is Joe Liebezeit. I'm the staff scientist at Portland Audubon. One of the programs I run is our coastal marine program, and so I spend quite a bit of time on the coast. And part of what we do is we do community science projects on the coast to get volunteers to contribute their time to, for us at Audubon, monitor birds and bird nests, including some species of concern. And I have been hearing lots of concern about drones and interaction with nesting birds, in particular black oyster catchers and seabirds. And so, yeah, I would love to get messaging out and figure out how we can make rules that are going to minimize impacts to wildlife as much as possible. I also have been involved, I'm not a drone flyer, but I've been worked with drone users to monitor wildlife as well. So I know it's a very useful tool for monitoring wildlife. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to working with you all on figuring out the best rules to minimize impacts to wildlife. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Kenji?
There we go. I'll start my video for this. My name's Kenji Sugihara. I'm a local attorney and actually a longtime drone pilot, been flying since around 2013. Do a lot of policy work. I originally worked with the Joint House and Senate Judiciary Committee on drone issues. I am on the FAA Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee and currently on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee, and previously the Remote ID Aviation Rulemaking Committee. I'm also the CEO of the Drone Service Providers Alliance, representing around 20,000 commercial drone pilots. And then I have extensive experience working with a lot of state agencies, for example, ODFW, ODOT, ODA, Parks, and I was most recently Commissioner for Travel Oregon. Unfortunately, I have timed out, but I have had the opportunity to visit state parks all across the state, from the Northeast to the Northwest, to the Southwest, to the Southeast, and everywhere in between. And I come from the perspective of, I understand that we need to balance interests between drone users and other recreational users, and also the environment and wildlife as well. So that's me.
Great, thank you. Kim?
Well, hi, everybody. I have very, very limited experience with drones. When I knew I was going to be on this committee, by the way, I'm with Oregon Equestrian Trails. I'm their VP of public lands. And when I knew I was going to be on this committee, I put out an email to our members, and boy, did I get an earful about bad experiences people have had with drones in state parks and elsewhere. But I listened to the first conference call that you guys had, and holy cow, did I learn a lot. I had no idea that state parks could only regulate where drones could take off and land. And I think my role here is going to be mostly listening, because I think our the equestrian community's issues are going to be handled probably state by park by park. But hopefully I can maybe shed a little light on what it's like to be a user on the ground. And then I'm going to be happy to disseminate information about what, who's responsible for what and what drones can and can't do back to the equestrian and hiking communities.
Great, thanks, Kim. Laurel.
Morning, everybody. My name is Laurel Hillman. I've worked for Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, same length as Brady, I think. I thought it was 17, but he said 18. And I was like, I guess it has been about 18 years. Doing ocean shore management and planning. I'm an ocean shore natural resource specialist for the agency, in charge of things like Western Snowy Plover Habitat Conservation Plan and other coastal management issues along the Oregon coastline. So I'm glad to be on this committee.
Thanks, Laurel. Matt?
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt. I'm the park manager at Smith Rock State Park. Been with the agency about 17 years too. And my experience with drones usually falls into trying to settle a conflict in the park between recreational users and then drone operators, both commercial and recreational. We get a lot of commercial use at the park too, and I see a lot of value in both, but just want to figure out the best way to help settle those conflicts when they do arise. Is at a place like Smith Rock, it tends to cause a conflict often. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Philip.
Hello, I'm Philip Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. I'm in a hypocritical position insofar as we used drone photos in some of our land use work. We've used, in fact, photos taken by Ed Rutledge on the Facebook issue. So I do know how useful they can be in that context. Nevertheless, both in terms of potential or actual impact to wildlife and habitat, and also intrusion on solitude on the Oregon shore, we have a very jaundiced view of drones.
Thanks, Philip. Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Lathrop, and I'm the State Aviation Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Forestry and our agency lead for Unmanned Aircraft System program. So excited to be here. My focus is typically more on emergency response, so it's always interesting to join other groups that are doing different things. So excited to be here.
Thanks, Sarah. And Helena just joined us. So do you want to introduce yourself too?
Hi, folks. My name is Helena Kesh, and I'm the ADA Coordinator and Policy Analyst for Oregon State Parks. And I will be monitoring chat and any Q&A.
Thanks, Helena, for being here to help. So thank you all for your introductions. You can see we have a wide variety of experience and perspectives, so that it should help in discussing the rules. I'm going to share my screen again to show you kind of where we're at and start the discussion. So you can all see my PowerPoint. Today, our agenda is to do introductions, and I put in the process for rulemaking and implementation so we can start with that discussion. And then we're going to talk about how recreational use works and any concerns, and then commercial and research use and what's different around that. And then we'll go through the possible rule language that I sent out and get your thoughts on each of those pieces of what's missing, what doesn't make sense, what should be added. Is there anything else that anybody would like to see on the agenda? Okay, so I just wanted to start with our goal for this rulemaking and what we discussed with legislators when they gave us permission to do rulemaking was to develop a balanced approach for the takeoff and landing of UAS or drones that aligns with our mission of protecting natural, scenic, cultural, historic, and recreational sites. So we're really looking for a balance. We want to provide clarity to drone pilots about where they can operate and to the public about where drones won't be, so that we can provide the guidance that everybody's looking for. And we talked a little bit last time about what the process for rulemaking is. You all will provide recommendations on the rule language. And then we will go into the public notice portion. We'll file a notice for rulemaking and open public comment. And then we'll have a public hearing where anyone can provide oral comment. We'll be taking public comments via our website. We have an email address, or they can anyone can send them via mail too. And once that public comment process is concluded, then the comments will be shared with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Commission. And as the comment process goes forward, we share them weekly on our website so that everyone can see all of the comments that we receive. There will be a staff report that goes to the commission with any recommendations for any revisions to the rules that were opened. And then the commission makes the determination about whether they want to adopt the rules as they're proposed, make any amendments based on the comments received. They could seek additional comments on changes, or they could choose not to move forward with the proposal. And then while we're in the process of developing the rule and moving forward with implementation, OPRD is going to have an internal work group to help develop a policy and procedures that implement the rule. Some of the things in rule, we wouldn't want to go too far. More of that is procedural about how the rule is implemented. We'll work with stakeholders, including the RAC, but also state and federal agencies to develop a map of areas that would be proposed for closure. And then once we get the policy in place and the rule in place, staff and partners will develop signs and educational materials. Much of this is going to be an education effort to let people know how to find out where they can fly and where they can and can't take off. Are there any questions about the process?
Nope, looks good.
Okay. So now
Actually, I had a question.
Oh, okay, go for it, Jeff.
Yeah, what is the general timeline for the whole thing? Like, when do you expect to, how many meetings do you think we're going to have? And when do you think the, you know, if you can lay out like when the public comment period will be, and then we'll go to commission and all that, just generally would be helpful.
Sure. If we are able to agree on some language, we could open as soon as February 1st for public comment, and it'll be open a minimum of 30 days, maybe a little bit longer depending on timing. And we'll do a public hearing within that time frame. We may not open it until March, depending on kind of the development of the language, and then the comment period would go 30 days with a hearing. The commission meets in April, and then they meet again in June. So at one of those two meetings, we would likely take the rule to the commission. And the policy development is starting now. I haven't had a meeting yet with this internal work group, but we are looking at who should be on it. So we will start the policy development. I would envision this committee, if may meet one more time if we need to, or this might be it. And then once we get the more of the public comment and work on the policy, then I would bring this group back together to talk about the policy and your insights as we start to develop the maps.
Thank you. I just would want to say that I would be interested in being on the map development and policy team, I guess, because I think that's going to be a really critical piece of this process. And I think not only myself, but other, speaking on behalf of the conservation community, I think other entities like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would be really important to have on there because they manage the seabirds on our coastal shoreline. So just want to throw that in there.
Great, we will keep that on the radar and plan to engage all of the land managers that we can in the next part of the process. So now what I was hoping, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I can't see anyone when I share it, but this would be the time to really talk about how recreational use works and if there are concerns with recreational use. Let me stop sharing. So Matt, you started with some of the recreational use concerns. Can you talk about the experience that you have at Smith Rock?
Yeah, at Smith Rock, especially at a park where you have climbing activities too, but people are oftentimes calling the park when they have a disturbance to their visit. And at a place like Smith Rock, where you're in a deep canyon and we've got somebody flying a drone, it's loud, it echoes through the park. And so we get a call at the park office oftentimes to help settle the frustration from somebody trying to have a quieter, more natural park experience with somebody that may be flying a drone. The challenge on the recreational side, though, is that it's very difficult for us to find the drone operator to come up with a solution on how best to where they could fly a drone where it wouldn't cause a conflict. The other catch with that too, and a lot of people find a lot of concern, is that they don't know the skill level of the drone operator. And we have had some close calls where, especially with climbing, where people are crashing their drone into the wall, or battery life runs out, or some mechanical failure, and the drone falls down and nearly hits people in a congested area. So from the recreational side, it's we just really see it when there is a conflict rather than the good experience. And at a park like Smith Rock, or a lot of our other parks that have neat features, that's where people want to come out and learn how to fly a drone, where they can get some great video. It's just not always the best spot to learn. And so that's a big challenge with us. We do implement a roughly 6 month closure for nesting raptors in the park. And so that's fairly effective. One of the biggest things that would help us is, and this is usually just the commercial pilots and the more responsible licensed pilots that call the park and check in with the park to see when and where would be the best place to fly a drone, or if it's going to cause any conflicts. And you can usually, when we talk to somebody, we can come up with a good location, a good time where they can do that, and it's not going to cause a problem. But unfortunately, it's the ones that are causing the most conflicts that don't communicate with us. And so it's really about just kind of making sure that everybody that comes to the park is going to be able to have a good visit at the park, and that we're also protecting it for, we have a very active raptor nesting season, but it goes beyond even just our 6 month closure. And we'll still have osprey flying through the park and hawks in the park year round. So lots of issues that we're just really unsure how the drones would affect birds too, outside of nesting raptor season. So that's just a little bit.
Thanks, Matt. Kenji, you had a thought?
Yeah, I do. So like I mentioned last time, and I think for the folks that are new here, there's what's called a remote ID that's going to be coming out. The rule in full implementation will be at the end of 2023, but all manufacturers of certain drones, pretty much mostly all drones, will have to have it included on new drones that are manufactured by the end of 2022. So that's coming down the pike. So you'll be able to identify where the drone is and also the pilot location, subject to some certain sort of limitations that might occur on that side. The other thing I just want to make sure is that we also put things into context in terms of, drones can be loud and annoying, but there's also a lot of other uses that can cause conflicts. For example, I know in a specific national park that the superintendent doesn't like Harley Davidsons because they echo all across the park itself. So we also have to remember there's always things that will always annoy us. So just put that into context. I know there's some conflicts that will happen, and we're going to try to limit them. And I agree with you. There are some folks who are flying drones that really shouldn't be, but at the same time, I think as long as we put those signs up, especially around Smith Rock, which is such a small state park, all things considered, that we can hopefully help you manage that in itself in combination with remote ID. It's going to give you the tools that you'll be able to find those people, say, hey, knock it off.
Great, thank you. Were there other thoughts on recreation? Ed, as a recreational pilot, do you have thoughts on problems you faced or things that have worked well?
I have some thoughts. My thoughts are, because I live on the beach, I want to make sure that we handle the beach traffic well. And by the way, at the Tierra del Mar beach, we have not only drone use, but we have RC fixed wing pilots who use that beach from time to time. The other interesting thing is that on the north slope of Cape Coanda, we have liftoffs and landings of paramotor and hang gliders, which is known under FAA as Part 103 devices. And within the rules right now, in terms of acceptable use, you may not have caught it because it's not in the materials that we got, but it is in the OARs for visitor conduct. There's a special carve out for liftoff and landing of Part 103 aircraft at Cape Coanda. So we have some additional considerations that we might want to think about here as to how to handle beach traffic that may be a little bit different from how we handle traffic at sites like Smith Rock. Smith Rock presents a particularly interesting and complex airspace, and I couldn't agree more. That is no place to learn how to fly one of these things. You want to do that someplace other than Smith Rock. But I do think there's a difference between the beach, which OPRD has responsibility for, and a lot of park sites. So I just want to keep that in consideration.
Great, thank you. Erica?
Yeah, I just wanted to add for recreational users, a lot of times, again, I'm representing the Oregon coast. People don't know where they are on the Oregon coast. They don't know what county they're in. They don't know if they're on state parks, on ODFW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and so there's a lot of different rules there. Matt, I'm sure when people are at Smith Rock, they know they're at Smith Rock, so you're a very great case. But a lot of times in the Oregon coast, people don't really know where they are. So it does make implementing rules and communicating to visitors very difficult because maybe they're landing and launching on one type of property, but then flying it over U.S. Fish and Wildlife, over sea stacks. So that is a challenge with recreational users, is just identifying how the rules change and then how we can message that. So just want to say that for recreational users. And then I had a question, which maybe Kenji can just answer in the chat, is with remote ID, is cell service needed in order to use remote ID?
So I'll answer that right now. In the original NPRM, which is the proposed rulemaking, it was required. In the current form, in the final rule, it is not required, so no cell service is required. What's going to happen is each drone will put out a signal over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and that gives out certain information. And just so people don't panic, when I talk Bluetooth, we're not talking about the when you have a mouse that it fades out after 3 feet. It's been tested out to about a kilometer or two, so maybe up to a mile, depending on sort of the electromagnetic conditions and also sort of the obstructions in the way as well. So it's been tested. ASTM has done testing, and there's been some other testing as well. So the range is pretty good.
Great, thanks. Philip, you're the next.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to underscore that concerns with recreational use aren't just about interactions with other recreational users. Our concerns, in fact, are focused on more remote areas where there may well not be anybody observing the drone use. I see gorgeous photos sometimes taken from drones of remote rocky habitat areas and think, wow, what was the impact there to the birds, seals, and so on in that area. So again, it's where the drone is in relation to the natural world and its habitat, not necessarily in relation to other recreational users.
Makes sense. And Joe?
Yeah, I'll just say from my experiences on the coast and from our volunteers and other contacts there that experience this day in, day out regarding to nesting birds and marine mammals and so forth. Oftentimes the drone user just is not aware that there are bird nests there, or that the bird nests, like the birds care about the drones until they have a bad interaction. And so I think education is going to be a critical part of it. The other thing is there are definitely other sources of disturbance, like Kenji mentioned, the Harley-Davidson motorcycles. I think the thing with drones and birds in particular that you have to keep in mind is that the drones are kind of like a bird, you know, and so birds are territorial, especially during the nesting season. And so when you have a drone flying around over a nest or a nesting area, the birds are often more reactive to something like that than other kinds of disturbances because of the seemingly, you know, competing with a bird. That's it for me.
Great, thanks. Kenji.
Yep, I actually had a question for Joe. Have you started to see any studies come out about the impact of drones on wildlife, for example? Are there any distance or sound profiles or flight profiles that might more be conflicting with the wildlife? For example, I can imagine some, if they fit the flight profile of a predator, that might cause more issues. But have you started to see more studies come out? Because I'd love to see some of the data that's being coming out, because that would help drive a lot of our analysis as well.
Yeah, actually, I have, in preparation for this committee, I did do a bit of a literature search and put some things together. There are studies out there that look at, you know, recommended minimum distances to minimize disturbances. Oftentimes it's about 100 meters. But of course, this, you know, that's kind of a generalized thing, which we would probably need to come to, because every species has their, you know, a different response. Some are more sensitive than others, and also on the individual level too. And then also the time of the year when they're nesting, they can be more disturbed than at other times of the year. But yeah, there is a body of literature out there that's growing. It's relatively new, and you know, I'm happy to share that others on this committee to help inform, you know, using the best science to move forward with making recommendations.
Yeah, so that's great. I think that'll be super useful, especially figuring out where to limit the drone usage or takeoff and landing. So that, I think for each park, that's going to be super helpful. So awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Laurel and Brady, can you talk about how we currently do research and scientific permits and what issues we've faced in that arena?
Sure. So when somebody has a research proposal, we have an online interface where they can apply for any sort of scientific research or collection related to scientific research permit that they might get either on the ocean shore or within a state park across the whole state. So if a research scientist applies for a permit and they request a drone, then Brady will get notified that they've requested to use a drone for their research permit. And then we'll look at the proposal, the specific location of the proposal, and analyze any potential impacts that research might have on resources, visitors, everything, and then either approve it with conditions or modify it, suggest that they might go to a different location for their research if that's possible, if there's a conflict that can't be avoided with modifications for timing, or, you know, so we've modified permits to exclude nesting season for raptors, for example, or had suggestions about height in consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, excluding it drone use within certain highly sensitive areas, such as our western snowy plover habitat restoration areas and adjacent to offshore rocks managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Those are just some examples of areas that we would typically, definitely during nesting season, have not permitted research permits for those areas. Brady might have some more thoughts on that too.
Not really. I think you hit them all, Laurel. The only other thing I would add is that based on our authority to regulate permitted uses, we also require applicants to be either operating under a COA or to have a Part 107 certification to ensure that they've got some sort of experience and or knowledge of operation, and especially rules related to UAS use.
So are there any questions? That was really more research and scientific, and I know that we've also done special use permits for commercial. So are there questions, thoughts anyone has on how commercial research and scientific use differs from recreational use? Kim.
Yeah, okay. One thought I had that I can see commercial use here for, again, off the beach for real estate, because we've had some sales of homes in Tierra del Mar that are on the berm overlooking the water. And on one occasion that I think I saw what looked like a commercial operation doing some video of this home. And I suspected, because it was on the sale at the time, that this was for real estate. So I don't know if that's a phenomenon that happens up and down along the coast, based on seeing it happen once. And having a drone myself, I could see the drone and understood what was probably going on. But that's an issue in terms of commercial use that I can see. And obviously, right next to the water like that, your best takeoff and landing zone is probably going to be on the beach at low tide. So there's an issue there in terms of commercial use.
Thanks. Kim, did you have a thought?
I just had a question. I wanted to clarify. It kind of sounds like from the discussion that the commercial users and probably also research users are generally more qualified, more experienced than recreational users may be, and they have a better understanding of what the rules are. I just wanted to confirm, is that true?
I would agree. On my experience, you get a lot of the recreational droners got a drone for Christmas, and it may be very base equipment, and they may have very limited skills in terms of operating the drone, and they may have very limited, if any, knowledge as to how to well use the airspace. Whereas a commercial operator of a drone I will understand the rules because they have taken a test with the FAA to get a what's known as a Part 107 certification that allows them to do commercial work. Kenji should probably step in here. He's far more knowledgeable than I am on this kind of stuff because he is the president of the Drone Service Providers Association for the whole of the US. So I would defer to Kenji on this, but my experience is watching the 18-year-old kid that just got a drone. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know about the airspace. They may have cheaper equipment that has limited control. And all they want to do is fly.
So I'll chime in here. It really depends, and it depends on the experience level, or in usually how many years somebody's been flying. And there's some recreational folks who've been at this for a very long time and who are very aware and are very conscientious. And I think it's like any pursuit. You probably get equestrians out there who are brand new, who have no idea what they're doing, and they get themselves into trouble. And I think it's the same thing with with drones as well. What's made the difference is drones have become so accessible. So you see a lot of folks coming out buying those $200 or even $100 drones that they bought off of Amazon or some cheap things, who really don't care and really have no idea what drones can do and how annoying they can be, and don't take the time to understand the rules. And that's what you're finding is causing a lot of problems. For example, it's those types of drones that you find out at Silver Falls in the waterfall. It's not the folks who are flying the $1,000 drones or the $1,500 drones, which if you lose, it's a big deal. And you have a lot of folks who are new who are also using those DJI drones who have a lot of safety features built in. So I think it's tough to say that it's more recreational and it's more just experience based, where there is a tendency for recreationalists to be sort of on the new side as well. And just as a heads up, recreational is very defined in terms of what's considered recreational use under the FAA. So there's a series of exemptions that allow people to fly under that recreational exemption. That's section 44809. But I think for us, at least, that's a little bit outside of scope. But just to think about it, 107, usually making money. Recreational has to be pure enjoyment, so to speak. And I also fly recreationally besides flying for commercial work as well. Oh, is there a threshold for remote ID? Do toy drones have to comply? Under 250 grams, no, as long as it's recreational and you're not flying over mass gatherings. So, yeah.
Joe?
Yeah, I'm just learning a lot that there are all different kinds of drones, inexpensive ones, more expensive ones, and the technology will change. And so I'm wondering if we need to include anything in the rules here about any drones that just should not be permitted at all, because they're just going to be hard to regulate. They're not going to have that remote ID, or like, I wonder if we need to name any of those things in this rules as we move forward. And I don't know, maybe Kenji or someone else that has a lot of experience with drones can comment.
Yeah, so when you're talking 250 grams, you're talking around this big, so very, very tiny. The only one that I can think is a Mavic Mini that might be able to, that falls at 249 grams, but most of the small ones, if they're in any sort of wind, they're just going to get blown away anyways. So they don't handle very well usually. There are some, for example, center whoops and some other FPV type, but most of them are going to be over 250 grams. Would it be worth it to ban them completely? Not really, because I don't think their sound profile or their endurance or anything's going to really create issues with either people or habitats, except for maybe landing in a sensitive area. So,
well, I didn't mean banning them completely. I just mean with respect to the rules that we're talking about today for the Oregon coastline and beaches and rocky areas. I mean, a small drone can still impact the bird.
Oh yeah,
so,
yeah.
I'll just say that.
They're really tiny. So,
Brady, did you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I feel pretty strongly that we want to stay away from including anything about technology in the rules that we put together. When you think about enforcement of these rules down the line, asking a park manager or park staff to be able to distinguish one type of drone from another is going to be next to impossible. And they've told me so when we've talked about these things. So relying on some section of the rule that either talks about remote ID or talks about size class is just not realistic, and also sets us up for a problem in the future if something changes, and which means we might have to go through this whole process again. So staying away from some specific technological language in the rules is definitely something that I think we would want to do.
Yeah, spot on, Brady.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll start going through what the draft language is. Feel free to share your thoughts as we go through it. Sorry, got to get to that page, and we can go from there. You're seeing the slideshow part of this. Okay, can you see the draft rules? Let's make.
We can.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I was like, I want to make sure that's the right one. So this is the draft rule that I sent out to everyone. This is all new language that would be added to our rules that would allow somebody to take off and land unless it was in a prohibited zone. We would automatically have all campgrounds or what's defined as overnight facilities as prohibited zones. And then something could be, a drone could take off or land in a prohibition zone with the permit or permission of a park manager. And last time we talked about public safety agencies being able to fly in emergency. And then one I want to talk about, we had discussed non-motorized model aircraft, such as gliders, being able to take off unless they were prohibited. Currently, they are prohibited in our snowy plover zones. So that's what that rule is about, snowy plover zones. And then just to provide some guidance for how zones would be created, the director would have to designate the zone based on criteria around visitor safety, sensitive natural, scenic, cultural resources, or user conflict. And then any proposed zones would be posted on our website for 30 days before they would become effective.
So Katie?
Yes.
I'm going to see yay on the overnight facilities. That's a no-brainer. Nobody wants to be woken up by a drone. So I back that 100%. So that's great language right there. I'm just giving my thumbs up. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Kim?
Okay, I have two questions. One is when the takeoff and landing prohibition zones are developed, will there be a public process park by park to determine that?
It would be put on our website and people could comment. It wouldn't be a public process like rulemaking. We would work initially to create the zones with stakeholder input, and we wouldn't be able to put in a new zone without a 30-day comment period, but it wouldn't be the same type of rulemaking public process.
Yeah, wasn't envisioning that. I just wanted to make sure that if there would be an opportunity for people to submit comments and say, gee, I don't want drones taking off or landing here, here, and here. The second thing is just a quick observation, and I suspect that this belongs more appropriately at the park by park determination of takeoff and landing prohibition zones, but it seems really logical that people would want to take off and land in parking areas because they generally are kind of open and it's an easy place to take off. If you take off and land near a horse that's tied to a horse trailer, that horse is going to spook out of its mind. It's going to flip over backward and break its neck. It's going to endanger itself and everybody around it. And so while I realize it's not possible to say you can't take off and land in parking areas, I'm hopeful that we can have some sort of carve out for equestrian parking areas when we go through that takeoff and landing prohibition zone process.
Okay, that's helpful. Joe?
Yeah, for that first paragraph, it almost would make more sense to kind of flip it around to where the drone is prohibited unless there are places that they can fly. And I think that would be more in alignment with what U.S. Fish and Wildlife has for their areas. So, I mean, I know part of your reasoning here is consistency of rules across different entities. So that's something to consider. And, you know, just getting back to, you know, the fact that I think Brady was right in saying that, you know, you can't put all these little details of like different drones and remote ID and all that. But I think that what that really reveals for me is, you know, having a precautionary approach where, you know, you need to minimize impacts first and then find places for drones to fly secondly. My final thing is for the last part E. Again, I think that's really important, that there has to be engagement in order to, by a wide group like this group, to develop these unmanned aircraft prohibition zones. Again, I think that's a super critical part of this process. And so I think that needs to be really clearly thought out of when that committee would be put together and who would be on it. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. Philip?
Thanks. A question leading to an observation. So I wasn't part of the earlier discussion. Did I understand from something that was said earlier then that OPRD can't regulate the drone in the air, only where it lands and takes off?
Correct. FAA has guidance over airspace, so the only thing we can do is address takeoff and landing on park.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well then that just underscores what I was thinking, and I, you know, Joe took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to comment. This very basically, rather than everything being permitted that is not forbidden, everything should be forbidden that is not permitted. And I say that in particular, my concern, of course, is the coast. And OPRD is in a unique position there, which it isn't necessarily with a state park surrounded by private land elsewhere. Since you know I've lost track. Is it 65 parks up and down the coast now? And on top of that, of course, then OPRD manages the entire shoreline as the public recreation zone. So it is in a position to actually protect the airspace over critical habitat. And of course, to us, we think the whole coast is critical habitat, but particularly rocky habitat areas, snowy plover areas or potential areas, seabird nesting areas. You know, there's the capacity to, you know, in practical terms, regulate the airspace by regulating landing and takeoff over a wide swath. Because it's managed by OPRD. So that would again lead to my agreeing with Joe that it should be flipped, and as much as humanly possible, we should be protecting habitat from overflight, not just takeoff and landing.
Brady?
Thanks. So Katie and group, I had a comment about the non-motorized aircraft, and this goes back to my previous comment about including specific language about specific aircraft types. This is exactly the type of problem that this can create for OPRD, is how staff can tell the difference, especially if it's an enforcement issue. So including the language about gliders creates a problem for the department to try and deal with here down the line, as opposed to treating everything the same, all unmanned aircraft the same. My second comment is related to the one about where and how we can fly, and it's almost kind of a question back to the rest of the OPRD staff on the call. And my recollection is that for hunting and metal detecting and potentially other recreation uses that we restrict, we specifically call out locations where those are allowed, as opposed to saying where those can't be done. Is that not true?
That's true as far as I know for metal detecting and hunting.
So then this would not be, this approach as laid out here would not be consistent at OPRD with the other ways that we deal with potential conflicts through recreation.
And part of the reason that we put it this way was an agreement with legislators who were supportive of the concept that the intent isn't to ban drone use. It's really to regulate where it's causes a problem and to stop it in those areas, but not to overall prohibit drone use. So it was more about ensuring that what we told legislators was accurate. And so having it as you can fly unless there's a safety reason or a natural resource impact reason is more in line with what we had explained the legislative concept. Kenji?
Sure. So a couple quick things. One thing that I want to note is harassment of wildlife is already a federal crime as well. So the mere act of disturbing wildlife or taking wildlife, those are still prohibited as well. I am going to push back because the flip side, or flipping this in essence would prohibit drones from any state park right off the bat, which I see is very problematic, and and especially some of the more remote state parks where there are no issues, it would, in essence, until the process is complete, prohibit drones from even flying. And I don't think that was the intent of the legislature. Having testified before the legislature in favor of the enabling language, I think for myself, it would just give me heartburn having testified in favor of it, that it would suddenly become a de facto ban, which I think would be, you'll end up with a lot more non-compliant users who are just going to say, if you're going to completely ban me, there will be just non-compliance. So I'll just present that as a viewpoint.
Ed?
I'm going to kind of agree here with Kenji. I think that having a general overall prohibitionist approach is going to give us the same result that prohibition gave us in the 20s and 30s. It's unenforceable, constructively unenforceable. We have a prohibition, for example, on the beach on driving now, large vehicles. And yet I have posted 381 photographs of large vehicles driving on that beach. And that happens because OPRD simply does not have the resources to patrol it. By the way, that beach is immediately adjacent to a snowy plover resting area, but these large vehicles still do it. So between trying to do an overwhelming prohibition of recreational or even commercial drones, and setting up OPRD staff for doing an impossible job, I'm not certain that's the best use of our time and resources here.
Thanks. Joe?
Yeah, I think it's highlighted by Kenji and Ed that, well, I think Kenji said that it is a federal crime to have disturbance to wildlife or take of wildlife, which is true. I think the issue is that we're just seeing increasing interactions with drones and other disturbances to wildlife. And yes, it's true that there might not be the capacity right now for parks or other entities to minimize that or regulate that. But I think that's the goal that they need to shoot for. And getting back to the flipping around of that part, that first paragraph, I still think strongly that that's the way we need to go. And it doesn't mean that you can't fly drones. It just means that instead of developing a map for places that are prohibited, you develop a map for places that you can fly drones. And I just think it's a better scenario. It fits in again with federal regs. It protects the birds more, and it protects wildlife and people more that want solitude. I think overall, even though there are those challenges of enforcement, which are always going to be challenges, and that shouldn't prevent us from doing the right thing.
Thanks. Erica?
Yeah, I'm I'm just really looking at B here, kind of two parts as I'm imagining this map that says here are the prohibited zones that you cannot fly in and the need to have a permit or permission in order to fly there. So I'm curious if there's criteria, if someone looked at that map and said, no, I'm a researcher. So is there criteria for the state parks to say, okay, we have an application that somebody wants to fly in this prohibited zone because they're a researcher, maybe they have extra points. Is that saying a visitor can also apply for a permit to fly there? I'm just kind of curious about what that looks like. And the second part, the permission of the park manager, is that just a nod like, yeah, it's winter, not a lot of people are around, go for it. I don't know if you could just give me a little bit more information on what it looks like to get permission from a park manager. Does that make sense, that question? Kind of a two-parter.
Yeah, it does. And it's a lot of that would be developed in the policy and in the procedure of how, because we put in rule the requirement on a park manager, then the policy and the procedure would help them to identify how best to do it, and what criteria and the process. It would be similar to the process that we currently use for special use permits, that park staff or park managers review what the request is and put conditions and talk through what would work best. So it would be similar to our special use permit process. Heather,
You posted her question on the chat. And it is, I am confused. I hear prohibition of flying. I thought we were talking takeoffs and landings. And Kenji responded, correct, Heather, I think we're confusing terms. So I'll let you respond to that.
Yes, we need to be very careful that it's only takeoff and landings. We are not able to address flight at all. Philip?
Yeah, once again, I find myself in the position of seconding Joe. I would say that the flipping it does not logically mean, well, you're prohibiting everything. It just means that you have to affirmatively permit activity as opposed to assume it's okay unless there's a definite prohibition. And again, seconding Joe, I fully understand that enforcement is very difficult and on the ground won't always happen, but it's not a reason to have a standard that you're shooting for. I mean, we don't allow murders just because, well, some people are going to use guns and kill people. We still find it useful to have a prohibition. And so anyway, there's no argument that it'll be difficult to enforce, but I don't think that's a reason not to have a standard and then work as close to that as you can.
Thanks. Kenji?
So I'll have to respectfully disagree on that because it is a ban until E happens. So that's a process. And in terms of each park manager getting to it or even getting around to it, there's no requirement that the park manager actually undergo this sort of process. So it is a de facto ban until E goes through. And this language is very specific in terms it's very narrowly tailored to address the harm in the specific locations where there are user conflicts. And I think that's what the key critical point is, where there are user conflicts or where there may be issues with wildlife. And to address the specific problems. And I think going the opposite is going to introduce more issues rather than solving the solutions that or solving the problems that we're trying to address through this rulemaking.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think I agree with Kenji on this issue, and it's simply because I think it's a department decision. It needs to be a department decision, and it needs an analysis based on the landmass of those areas with conflicts versus the landmass of where conflicts do not exist. And I think that will be something that only your department can decide. But I do like the way the language is currently. And I do think the way that Katie described the initial conversations with legislators, that it's probably good to be in keeping with why you went into the process and how you described it initially. So I just wanted to voice that.
Thank you. Kenji, did you have another thought before we go on to the next rule?
Oh, sorry, I left it up by mistake.
Okay, thanks. Laurel?
I don't know. Brady brought up the issue of the non-motorized gliders, and if we leave it as is in that current language. There would be no rules that apply to non-motorized model aircraft. There are rules that apply to non-motorized vehicles that have people in them. So I just feel like not having any rules that apply, regardless of whether it's motorized or not, is problematic, given that gliders pose the same or possibly even more threat to wildlife than motorized equipment does, given their behavior patterns looking more like predators. That was a concern raised by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service staff when we met with them. So I think not having any rules that apply to them as far as safety or resource concerns, not that it has to happen here, but I'm just, in addition to the concern that Brady brought up, I'm concerned about not having any rules that apply besides the plover restrictions.
Okay, Joe?
I have some chat. Can I jump in with that? Okay. So I posed a question and I'll just kind of go through the thread really quick. What is the typical range for a drone? Can they fly a mile from the operator or 200 feet, or what is it? I understand the operator must be able to see the drone. Is that correct? Heather responded, Kim, yes, that is basically correct. Drone ranges vary, but operators must remain in line of sight. And then Erica added, thanks for clarifying about the need for implementation and operations after the policy is improved. I'm concerned about consistency in messaging and enforcement when there seems to be a high turnover of park managers and management units on the coast. Additionally, understanding who should apply for a permit in prohibited zones. Is this really for research and commercial use exceptions only? Or should visitors planning their trip apply for a permit? Do managers have the capacity to approve these?
That one's a good question, Erica. And the intent would be that anyone could apply for a permit to fly in a prohibition zone. There would be, park managers would have to look at that and see whether if there was a different area that they could direct the person to, or if it fit within, if there was a reason that we would want to grant a permit. And we do special use permits for a number of different things. So it could be a concern, but it wouldn't necessarily.
Okay, yeah, I'm just curious if, visitors are applying to do this in the winter when the birds aren't nesting, if, managers are like, yeah, this is a great time of year to do this, this is okay. Just so that we can help with that messaging of saying, hey, yeah, you're probably not going to get approved in the spring because of nesting birds, but come back during king tides in the winter. Just something we're thinking about. Thanks.
That's helpful. So I think we had Joe, you were next.
Yeah, just want to get some clarification on something Kenji was discussing, maybe from you, Katie. Kenji mentioned that if we did do the flip around and, made it started with all areas restricted and then developed this map of places that you could have drone usage along the coast. He said that right now, or something like that, you would have everything would be prohibited right now or something like that. But isn't it true that we are discussing this during these sessions, and then, in forget what dates, I think you said April or June, when the director decides on what we all come up with, then that will be the time when this rule will be implemented. And at that time, we will have the map of all the areas that folks can fly their drones. And so is that true? Is that scenario true? Or is it true that everything, if we went and flipped this around now, that everything would be prohibited right now? It didn't make sense to me. I thought we were going through this process right now, and then.
Not right now, but in terms of upon rule implementation.
Say that again, Kenji, I'm sorry.
Upon rule implementation. So as soon as the rule is effective, the flights in essence, or at the takeoff and landing, would be banned until each part undertakes E.
Okay, but it was, so is it not true that takeoff and landings would be allowed in any area that would come out with the rule that was, part of that map that's going to be developed? Is that coming after the rule, or I'm clear about the timeline here?
we would develop the map as soon as we could, but it wouldn't. The rule will likely be put into place before the map is finally developed, because that will take a process of working with park staff and stakeholders. The areas that are specifically prohibited in rule would be prohibited as soon as the rule was effective. Does that help?
It does help. I don't see why you can't wait until the map is done and then implement the rule, so that there wouldn't be a time when there is total prohibition.
Remember, it's not just one map. It's a map for every single park property across the state park system. And how many parks are there, Katie?
280 something, I believe.
Each with individual park managers, and it would have to go through analysis for every single one of those 280 parks.
Ed?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody, we've got it better in the last couple of comments, but we're talking about launch and landing zones here and not flying, and not airspace considerations. That's within the jurisdiction of the FAA.
Great, thank you. So we've had a lot of great discussion on this one. I'm going to go to the further rules so that you can see those, and we can continue to discuss. This would, to address the special use permit, we have a number of criteria for developing it or for issuing a special use permit. And this would just add that we would allow special use permits for takeoff and landing of drones within a prohibition zone. And then we get to the definitions. If we choose to leave the non-motorized model aircraft in, it would be defined based on what I found as a definition for gliders. Overnight facilities are defined as everything within a campground. And this matches a definition elsewhere in rule. So that, and then public safety agency is defined in statute, and unmanned aircraft system is also defined in statute. And so we tie directly to those statutes. So that would be all for the campground section. And then we move to the ocean shore piece. Any thoughts on that before we start talking about ocean shores?
Yes, Katie, there's a comment. So from Kim, it says, so under the allowed unless prohibited language, that means use is allowed everywhere until each park develops its prohibited zone map. And Kenji responded, correct, which is the current status.
Yes, except for that it would be prohibited in overnight facilities automatically. So in campgrounds, they would be prohibited based on 9A. So if we move to the ocean shore rules, they're very similar to the park rules, with the exception of trying to determine the areas that would automatically be closed. And in here, I put the territorial sea plan areas of marine garden, habitat refuge, research reserve as the protected areas that are already protected, and that we wouldn't allow drone use in those protected areas without, we wouldn't allow drone takeoff and landing in those protected areas without a permit. And then any additional areas, we would go through a mapping process to see if there were additional areas. So I see Ed first.
Yeah, and I want to speak to the notification period of minimum of 30 days on. I don't have any problem with that. I'm wondering both here and earlier on notification if it's appropriate to put into the rules that notification shall be on site, or is it more appropriate that that just is not mentioned in the rules? Bottom line, I think that there needs to be some sort of notification that if we are essentially in a no launch and landing zone, there ought to be something on site that says that, so that when the person drives up and gets out with their brand new drone, that they see something, because they may not have thought to go to a website to check out that particular issue.
So we would put signage. We could think about if there's that signage would be, it's always hard to say that signage is required. From an operational perspective, we would put signs in areas where.
All right, and I just don't know whether that's appropriate to actually put that little minutia into the rule or not. And I noticed that one of your PowerPoint pieces here that we saw at the beginning of the program, there was a sign there, and something like that on site, I think would be very helpful to the rangers that have to enforce this, so that they are able to say, it's posted, there's the posting. But I don't know if that's appropriate to put into the rule. And that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thanks. Philip? Oh, you might be on mute because we're not hearing you.
I clicked it honest. Under A, I just wanted to note that isn't really the terminology being used in the territorial sea plan now, in terms of, now it's marine conservation area and so forth. And so, I mean, the technology that matches up with the site designations under the new Rocky habitat management strategy should be used. And as far as the signage goes, sure, but on the other hand, there are significant areas where, anyway, it's hard to think where you would place the sign for something like where an entire spit is a snowy plover nesting area or potential snowy plover nesting area. And we would strongly advocate for prohibiting drones over any territory that is or could be used by snowy plovers. So you've got a whole spit or a whole stretch of the dunes in a case like that. So where do you place the sign? And similarly, where someone, you could have a sign where someone could access the shoreline, but there might be a series of say, rocky habitat areas that the person could access on foot, and you don't want to have a sign on each one of those, possibly remote rocky habitat areas. So anyway, I just pose that as a challenge in any case, but all the more if things are, if your assumption is it's permitted unless you see a sign, whereas if your assumption is it's not permitted unless you see a sign saying it's permitted, then that gets a little easier to make sure that the rule is communicated to the potential operators.
I think that's something where we can work together and figure out where the main egresses and ingresses are, and work together and find out some good places to put the signs. I think that's somewhere we can all work together.
Yes, and we probably don't want to put it in rule, because if there's not a sign, it doesn't necessarily mean it's open. Sometimes signs, especially on the Oregon coast, get moved. So, well, operationally, we want to put signs. We don't want to leave it up to only signed areas. Joe?
Yeah, it's good to see that the Rocky Habitat designated areas are in the plan. I think, as Philip mentioned, the terminology is going to be updated, so would probably need to be updated here. And I think you could just go ahead and add in the snowy plover protected areas as well on the north coast, or the SPMAs, and then I forget the name, and Laurel can tell us on the south coast and central what the names are. But I think it's a no-brainer. They need to be no-fly zones during the breeding season. For sure.
No takeoff and landing. Sorry.
So I didn't see where they are in here. Maybe they are somewhere, but I think putting them in there would be great.
Joe, they're already in rule, a separate rule, but it'd probably be a good idea to refer to it here. So if somebody's just looking at the section of rule, that they would also know that that is already a pre-existing rule, that takeoff and landing is not allowed.
Great. Yeah, I didn't know that they were already in there. Sorry, I'm just catching up on these rules too. I was at the first meeting, Kenji, so. That's my
And I support you, Joe, on this one.
Yes,
Makes
we
sense.
can add the snowy plover areas and refer back to that rule. We can definitely do that and change it to how the new Rocky Shore plan is referring to protected zones.
I can get all those names to you, Katie.
Okay, that would be helpful. Other thoughts? Joe?
Oh, no, hand's still up, sorry.
That's okay. And Laurel, I think you.
No, I have a new hand, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, of course.
So the restrictions for snowy plovers are seasonal restrictions currently. So I don't know if that would be clarified here or if the intent is for this to be seasonal as well or to be year round. It was just a question. So it would be inconsistent if it said here that they were year round and then currently in the snowy plover rules, they're seasonal. So because the concern is seasonal.
My intent
primarily
reference the rule
Yeah.
and not change it.
Yeah, I think that's best approach is to refer to the other rule and incorporate by reference.
So then it would be seasonal. It wouldn't be year round.
Yeah.
So just to move to this one also has the same process for applying for a special use permit, adding the takeoff and landing could be allowed with special use permit. And then the same definitions, except for that we would add a definition for territorial sea plan so that it was clear what we were referencing, and that's the statutory definition.
Katie, just to keep in mind that when you reference another rule, that if that other rule changes, it will change this rule.
Yes, and so if the snowy plover areas needed to be expanded, then we would want them to include.
Yeah, I just wanted everybody else to know that too.
Yes,
Yep.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
So those are the draft rules as proposed right now. Are there things that anyone feels, I'm going to stop sharing, are missing? And I know there's still a discussion and some people feel strongly it should be prohibited and some allowed. But are there other things that you think should be added or should be clarified that we haven't talked about so far?
Yeah, Katie, how do you address like violations? So somebody takes off in a no takeoff and landing zone. Is there a fine or is there are there other administrative rules dealing with the visitor conduct that would be applicable?
Hey, Matt, do you want to address how you would do enforcement?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, when we do respond to something, let's say somebody flying a drone currently at Smith Rock during raptor nesting season, and we do have that posted on the website and signed on site, not to fly a drone. So we usually start at the lowest level and just go out, make contact with the person, explain the reason behind the rule. And that usually, in 95% of the time, gains compliance. In a few situations, somebody disagrees with our rule or wants to fight us on that one. And then the next step up from asking for compliance could be to just document it, give them a written warning and see if that helps. Having it on paper sometimes will deter somebody. So we'll start there next. If that's going to be a fail as well, then we can do a citation, which is about $115. And some people will chalk that up to, hey, I'll pay $115 to fly my drone. And so if they continue to fly the drone after that, then we will give them an order to leave the park for maybe 24 hours to 72 hours. And we have had to go that route, but it's very rare. Usually it's just gained with explaining the reason behind the rule. But that would be the course of action.
So that means that they're prohibited from accessing the state park property or asset for that duration. And can you what's the longest period of time that you can do that for?
So that's an exclusion, and you know, in very extreme circumstances, it would warrant up to like 1 year or 2 years. I haven't heard of an exclusion that's gone beyond a couple of years, and we don't take that lightly either. And that exclusion can also be appealed, which then it bounces up through our district and region managers all the way up. But yeah, they're typically short term, like 6 months.
Okay. So there's an administrative process that's available to you for, okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Matt, typically you would do an order to leave first, correct?
Correct. Yeah, just like a 24 to 72 hour order to leave. So it's not, that one's not appealable. That would just be, hey, let's just ask you to leave. And usually it's just to deal with it that weekend or something when it's actually causing the biggest conflict. And then if they don't leave, then we rely upon our local law enforcement to come in and help us, because then you can bump it up into that would be considered then a criminal trespass if they're not leaving.
Great, thank you. Joe, you were next.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a place in the rules to identify or figure out what would the regulations be or best practices in areas that are open for drone usage, but say, you know, we want to develop something where, and according to the literature, from what I've seen so far, 100 meters is a good kind of standard for, you know, keeping your drone away from a known nesting colony or so forth. So I think it would be important somewhere or at some point during the process, whether it be in the rules document here, that in areas where you're allowed to fly drones, that you have some kind of measures like that the public can clearly grasp and use.
So you're saying that, like in our education, that if it's in a takeoff and landing zone, but there's one that's a prohibition zone nearby, that you just want to provide education between?
I guess I'm just saying that, well, ideally it'd be a rule like you would have in an area where drones are allowed to fly or to take off and land, that they shouldn't be done within 100 meters of known nesting locations or known colonies. And that gets a bit tricky because nesting locations do change from year to year, but there are some historic areas where birds nest, you know, every year. And so, I mean, that's just one thought. Willing to kind of think about that more, but that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Thanks, Philip.
Yeah, I'm just thinking aloud here. I came to this mostly with my concerns about you know, impacts on wildlife. So I'm just wondering, what about situations where there are specific human activities where having a drone, you know, buzzing them is problematic? So, you know, an area where it's permitted and it's an open, empty beach, it's not affecting either people or wildlife. But what if there's a school class doing a field trip there? What if there's a marine debris cleanup activity going on where then it does become bothersome and perhaps people even feel, you know, their privacy intruded on by having a drone overhead? Is there any way to address, as I say, specific temporary human uses where the interaction with the drone is problematic when it might not be at other times?
Yeah, Katie, I could maybe expand on that a little bit. We do have another rule, Oregon Administered rule, that we apply in those situations where an activity is constituting a public nuisance or hazard. So we would approach it using that rule, that it's kind of specific and it's a little bit vague on purpose that way to apply to a lot of different situations.
And Laurel, you had.
Yeah, I was wondering if, based on what Joe said, if we should have some sort of guidelines that apply, even if it's an area that allows drones. We have guidelines that apply for non-motorized vehicles on the beach. For example, I just posted the language there, obviously, that says vehicles, but it just sort of gives them a heads up that they need to be careful with their equipment, even if it's an allowed area, that they should operate it in a safe way. And so something like that might be, I don't know if that's sort of where Joe was going. But we do have that in some other sections of rules for things that are allowed.
Mhm. Yeah, we could put, I mean, I would hate to say that it had to be a known nesting site because I don't think people are going to know nesting sites, but putting something about fly within FAA or take off and lands within FAA regulations or something like that. Heather, do you have thoughts?
So I did, and I do have thoughts. I agree with what Joe is saying. And while we're talking about takeoff and landings only, I know it gets confusing. People want to regulate flight, but it would be really good educationally to put on your website best practices. It's not bad, like, around horses or, anything. I mean, just the best we can do to educate everyone, your new drone user, wherever. So if there is an area that is designated for takeoff and lands, right? Probably not a good idea if it's surrounded by horses at the time, right? Like there's ample ability for us to put some best practices and education pieces together and tie it to some of the literature that Joe was talking about. I think would be fantastic.
Great, thanks. Kenji?
Yeah, I think one of the primary things that we have to remember is you're 99% of the people out there, whether they're flying drones or, for example, riding mountain bikes, want to be respectful of other people, and they don't want to have horses freak out. They don't want to bother the seabirds, the puffins, and the cute animals. And they don't want to bother raptors. So I think the more education we get out there and say, hey, this could negatively impact other people. It's really disturbing to people. I think most, like 99% of the people will get it because, there is that 1% who's always going to be jerks and they don't care. And I think that the administrative rules or those enforcement powers are out there for those 1% who don't care. I'm with Joe. I think that education of this could impact this wildlife in a negative way is absolutely perfect. And I think it's not only on the OPRD websites, but Heather, I'm going to volunteer you on the ODA website as well. But any tools that we can provide visitors, maybe even on Travel Oregon's websites, ACWA's websites, I think is the best in terms of how to drone respectfully, how to do it right. Because I think when all things are considered, people want to do the right thing. And if you give them the tools to do it right, they will. It feels like
on questions, you could have questions to contact Department of Aviation too. Go back to us, on best practices and education. Same with Sarah. I'm sure that there's issues that we can all help out with, but Kenji's right, and I just think we can have a best practice out there on the website. I think it'd be great.
Sounds good. Joe?
Yeah, no, I think the education piece is huge, but I was also talking about potential penalties for people too that don't follow those best practices. Even in areas now we're talking, I know there's going to be the set of areas that are going to be off the table, but for the areas that are on the table for takeoffs and landings, I still think that there should be some best practices plus fines potentially, because I think people will just bend the rules and do what they want to do if there isn't some type of consequence. So
isn't it monetary fines isn't there some other required statutory language? Last time I talked to Chris, I remember him mentioning something about that. But I'm not opposed to it, but I don't know if the state parks is allowed to. Katie, you probably have a better idea on that. But one other thing I want to note was there are federal prohibitions on flying directly over people as well, unless you have specific authority from the FAA to do ops over people. So that's another prohibition as well at the federal level.
So to answer the question about fines specifically, OPRD uniformed officers can issue violations. They don't do citations, but violations, and those violations can come with a fine. If we were to put in some of the language that about safe operations, similar to what Laurel had posted about restricting speed and manner, if somebody was flying in an unsafe manner, then our officers could issue a citation based on citation for a violation based on that. Did I say that right, Matt?
I like that.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on what Joe was saying though, this rule would give us authority to cite at a class D violation, which is that roughly $115 currently, which we've had some feisty drone pilots chalk that up to, hey, I'll just pay the $115 and keep flying. Perhaps we should consider moving, if for the prohibited zones, making it a higher consequence citation or violation. So a class A, class B, something that's going to maybe hit up in the $400 range.
I wouldn't be opposed to that. That makes perfect sense. It's like somebody's flying when they're not supposed to, or taking off or landing in a spot that they're not supposed to, and they have plenty of forewarning. That makes sense to me.
Okay, we can add that specification. Are there other thoughts of things that we're missing or should consider? So I will go back and add in the snowy plover areas, put the correct titles for marine conservation zones, and add some best practices language that matches our existing rule, and the change to violation, and then email it another draft out to everyone to get your thoughts on that. Does that work?
Yeah. And another quick question: to coordinate with the other RDMOs to get the message out on their websites, would that wouldn't be a rule requirement? Rather, it would just be sort of an implementation, sort of coordination, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I have a question. It clearly, public education is a big part of this, and I know that there probably is some internal ability for that at parks, probably not a lot. But I was wondering, as part of the legislation for this rule, is there any funding for outreach and developing these best management practices that Heather, we've all been talking about it? Because I think that if we don't have some type of plan to to do that, then this could be still an issue. And I know that I think you said before there is some funding for signage or something. So I just want to get a little bit more clarity on that piece of it, and how it would be implemented, the public outreach and the signage and all that stuff.
So there's not specific funding that was part of the legislation in any way. We would work with partners in the same way that we do for other education processes, and we have an internal sign development. So we would work with our internal team on that. Erica, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Joe. And so that's something we do here at OCFA within our region. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we work with state parks and all the other land management agencies, and drone usage and trash management have been identified as the two impacts that we're going to message this summer specifically. So I've already given warning to Travel Oregon that there's going to be some changes around drone usage, and they're just waiting to hear, what that is and how they can help communicate that to visitors. And then, so we've developed messaging, and of course with, we really get into the psychology of visitors. When you tell people don't do something, like that resonates differently than saying what you can do. So we have set aside funds and have a meeting in early February with all the land management agencies. I have a whole menu of options of what do they want to wrap buses in San Francisco with this? Do they want to do geofencing in some of these high use areas where there's cell service? Do they want to have ads in newspapers in Idaho, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco? There's a number of ways that we can message this. But of course, we have to understand what the messaging is going to be. So just a long way of saying that, yes, 100% on the Oregon coast, we do have funding set aside to help with this communication. And then we always share that language with the other 6 RDMOs in Travel Oregon. And Travel Oregon is warm to also sharing that messaging, whether that's an article or an influencer doing it the right way. There are so many creative ways that we can show visitors how to do the right thing, because ultimately they do want to be like a local, and they do want to do the right thing. So we're definitely here to support that outreach and education.
I'll volunteer to be that poster person. Oh boy.
I have it written down, Kenji. You're committed.
I'm happy to do that. Just a quick question. Are there any provisions for emergency landing? So say, for example, there's an in-air emergency and you got to land now. Otherwise it's going to crash into something or crash into someone. Do we want to sort of make a provision in there just saying, if it's a true emergency and you got to land that thing, otherwise it's going to end up in a disaster, that it's sort of exempt from the rules? I could see that, for example, with like ODF, you're out there flying a mission and you have to make an emergency landing, but it might be covered under something else. But well, I guess if it's commercial, just something to the effect that if it's an emergency, then it might not be subject, or there's some provisions allowing for emergency landing.
We could add, we do have, for like aircraft on the Oregon shore, they're not allowed to land unless it's an emergency. So we could add that language, or we could deal with it in an officer discretion, that the officer
discretion. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
And that might be an easier way, because
trying
to figure out what is an emergency or isn't an emergency kind of opens up a forms.
Yeah. I'm open to giving the discretion. So perfect.
Does that feel okay, Matt? Would you?
Yeah, I would rather just use officer discretion on that one. We're not going to cite somebody just because it's a hard and fast rule, even if they had a legitimate reason. So we apply all those rules on a case-by-case basis.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Good. Well, thank you all for the conversation and your insights. It was very helpful and important to get us toward the right rule language. So I will email out changes, and then we'll plan to open public comment and get all of the public comments. And then I'll bring this group back together to talk about kind of what we heard through public comment before we move forward to the commission.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you very much for your time and joining our Rule Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Look forward to working with everybody. Thanks. All right.